and then you pull it up. So now you're up this tree, you know, holding a burning bush as well, and you're surrounded by bees. So it's you know, you've got to have a certain type of temperament to sort of get into this line of work. Once the bees are pacified, then it's just a question of nicking the honey. It doesn't always go to plan, but when it does, that's what you get. I don't have any photos of the honey being collected, simply because we were filming, obviously, the film crew were filming separately to me on this occasion, because two of you can't hang in a tree next to each other. So we would take it in turns and on different trees. And just before it was my turn to go right up and film the honey being collected, our rope access guy was actually attacked by bees and got stung very badly. And had to take 2 days off, and it was the penultimate day. So I've only got shots of them eating it down the bottom, unfortunately. Oh, there you go. That's how we do it. That's Tim. That's the cameraman, and that's Tete. And if you notice this system here, it's the two-rope system for climbing. So you're hopefully, if something fails, you've got another point of contact. That's what you do always. When you're climbing on two ropes. One of the contraptions we used, it's one of the things I get asked most in the Jungles episode. There's one shot of Tete climbing the tree, where the camera sort of pans from the very base of the tree right to the top. And to get the shot, we used this device called a dolly, which is essentially you attach the camera here, which that little aerial it allows it to be controlled remotely, so you can move it around on this axis here. Meanwhile, the two ropes that, if you remember from the previous slide, are kind of fed through these system of pulleys here, and then you stick this device on one end of the rope, and on the other end you stick a heavy weight that's the counterweight. Then if you take that weight, if you push the weight right to the top and keep the camera down the bottom, and it's still enough, and it's weighted well, if you let the weight drop, it pulls the camera up. And you get this shot.
And Tete is making impressive progress.
Gives you an idea of how big the tree was. When you get there, then you pan it. You've got a little remote you pan down. That was our camp during that shoot. One of those. All the fires were on permanently, as you can imagine, because the camp was full of our camp was full of bees too. Mainly sweat bees, which don't sting you but are incredibly annoying, but also the bees that were the bees from the honey that we were collecting, and everyone was getting stung all day, every day, probably about 20 times a day. We had every part of our clothing was gaffer taped tight, but they'd still get in. And they didn't attack you, but if something got in and struggled, and you went like that, then they bite and they sting you without a shadow of a doubt. I was glad to get away from that place. Okay, a rivers story now, and I think out of all the stories that I covered for Human Planet, I think hands down my favourite, by far the most touching as well. We're in Ladakh, which is the Indian Himalayas, in a place called Zanskar. That's not actually Zanskar, but that's Ladakh in the winter. An incredible place. Anyway, let alone the reason we went there. So up in Zanskar, which is the highest point, the highest plateau point of Ladakh, we were there to film these guys. It was a bunch of school children on their walk to school. And unlike your average school kid I'm sure it's the same in Aberdeen, it's not a four-wheel drive that gets into school. It's a 5-day walk down the river. Zanskar, for 6 months of the year, is cut off from I say the mainland, from the rest of Ladakh, because the only way, there's two ways in and out. There are roads, but they go over a couple of incredibly high passes, and they're snowed in for 6 months of the year. So the kids all go to boarding school in Leh, which is the capital of Ladakh, and I don't know what it is kilometres-wise, but it's a 5-day walk, and the only route that's accessible at that time of the year is to walk the frozen river, the Zanskar River, which flows from their villages down to the area where they get to their boarding school. So twice a year, I think it's once a year, the parents, one or other of the parents, take the kids to school, and they call it the Indian word for the frozen river is chadar, which means a kind of veil, and they call it the chadar walk. Essentially, was the translation of it. Quite a lot of people explore, backpackers and generally people who like doing expeditions do this walk. It's almost a kind of rite of passage in this part of the Himalayas, and I think what quite a few of them don't realise when they're planning this trip is when they get there, they realise that there are plenty of Ladakhi people doing exactly the same walk, but without hundreds of porters and without any of the equipment that they've got. I walked with a young family, and that's the father of the family there. This is just before we left their house. There they are. I've got a lot of respect for these guys. And I love this picture because it's not a very good picture really, but everyone's looking at the camera. That's really hard when you've got animals in the picture. I don't think I've ever taken a picture when everyone's got eye contact. So this is the middle daughter and the youngest son, and she stayed at home. That's us when we left home. It's an incredible journey. There's nowhere to stay on the way. You have to sleep in caves, and that's well, I'll come to it a bit later. But this crack here is one of the big dangers when you do this walk. Apart from the cold, the year earlier on in the year when we were there, a Belgian guy actually died doing the trek from hypothermia. But the falling through the ice is the major problem you have, because obviously underneath the ice the water's flowing very fast, and if you go through, you will go under, and the chances of you coming up in another air pocket are quite small because they're quite random. Often you get bits like this which are solid as a rock, and they're fine. But the lower down the river you get, the more it melts, and you have to make trekking decisions. Like when you're here, do you go down this side or down this side? Because if you go down this side, I mean, you can see here that you can probably get to there, but actually you might not be able to get across that bit. So, and certainly you're not going in the water, because that would be the end of your life. So in the evenings, all dotted down this route are hundreds of tiny little caves, and people have been sleeping in them for decades. I don't know how long, but certainly a long time. They don't look very happy there, do they? They were really lovely people. So you collect firewood on the way. There's not a lot of firewood in Ladakh, so as you're walking, anytime you see a bit of wood, you pick it up and stick it on your back, and stay the night in the cave. And if you're not staying in a cave, this was one of the sites. I didn't walk with the film crew all the time because I focused on a different family to the film crew, so I didn't get in their way. The film crew had 46 porters, funnily enough, because we had cranes, we had all kinds of huge pieces of equipment for making the film with. But still, often that's one of our tents there. This was a sort of campsite type place on the last night before we made it to the end. But I tended to sleep in the caves because which were kind of either side of here, even when we arrived at places like this. Believe it or not, quite a few of the Ladakhis just slept outside. I mean, it never rains there, and as long as you can stand the cold, you're fine. So if you can wrap yourself up, you can pretty much sleep anywhere. And I haven't got any photos with me, but there are people just dotted all around here, just on the floor. It's incredible. I mean, it's super cold there. So yeah, this is us on the route. Now, while we were there, there was a snow avalanche upstream when we were about a day into the trek, and we had to walk up and then walk back essentially, which we did. On our way back, the avalanche that had been up there for 3 days, which had dammed the river, broke, and it sent a torrent of water down the river, breaking the ice all the way down as we went. And we were stuck for almost 7 days, because once the ice breaks, and there's no way of walking, and you can't go forward or back. You have to wait for it to refreeze. And because we were there at the end of the season, because the beginning of the school term is near the end of the winter, it didn't look like it was going to refreeze. And we got to the point to within sort of half a day of the Indian Army were going to fly out and pick us up, because it was the only way we were going to get out. Right in the 11th hour, we got word from downstream that someone had made it past the bit that we thought we weren't going to be able to get past. So we carried on. Unfortunately, we made it to the end, but then we were, like I say, we now had to walk, all the ice was smashed and then refrozen. And as you can imagine, it's a hell of a lot more dangerous now, because all these gaps here are real gaps. And I think this is part of the reason why this story touched me so much, because these kids that we were walking with were just incredible. And I mean, they were kids. We're talking 10-year-olds, you know, messing around, chucking snowballs at each other and playing. But also walking behind me and tapping me on the shoulder and steering me in the right direction. You know, there's me, the 40-year-old, you know, kind of intrepid explorer type person, and these guys are totally watching over me. And I really, yeah, I've never met kids like it before. They were sort of 10-year-olds in one moment, and then sort of 50-year-old wise old people in the next. Like I said, yeah, as you get near the end and the lower sections of the river, there's much less area to walk on. And like I say, you have to start making good predictions about which side to go down. Very often you get it wrong, as we did on quite a number of occasions. And even, I mean, it's very hard to tell what you're going to be able to come up against. And often you can climb up on the rocks and get over, but often you couldn't as well. It's something that we were always worried, and on a couple of occasions we had to make huge detours to get back. This particular moment actually made it into the final film. I was there. It was like a bottleneck that I was way ahead of the film crew, but we got to this point and we'd come so far down one side of the river, we didn't know what to do, and so we waited, and then the rest of the crew arrived, and we had to. I mean, it made it into the film in the end. We even sent a cameraman like half a day back down the river to cross over, to come back down on the other side and go on the other side, so we had another vantage point of what was going on. But then, yeah, there was a very tense moment where we all had to squeeze through this small gap. And then, obviously, all 45 of our porters as well. The lower down you get, like I say, the more dangerous it is, until you reach this point, which is, well, we shot this 2 years ago, so I'm sure it's different now, but the Indian government are building a road up to Zanskar at a lower level, so in order for it means it will be open in the winter all year. And they're blasting the road, and this is like the end of the trek, essentially. I mean, 5 years ago, this was a 10-day trek. You know, I don't know, I mean, these guys told us their grandparents used to walk the whole way to Leh, which is a sort of 20-day walk. I mean, it's incredible. Nowadays, like when we were there, it was a 5-day, and I think they reckon in another 6 years the road will make it to Zanskar, which is obviously great for this lot. Not so great if you want to do the walk, which you still can, and I'd say if you want to do it, go in the next 5 years, because there'll be no point in doing it in 5 years' time, because you'll be able to drive a car up there. So yeah, this is where they were this is all stuff come off the road where they were blasting a new road. So now this is the very end. That's the end of the ice. At this point, this is the final part of the road where they're building it. And you can then climb up onto this road. And because we had a satellite phone, we called ahead as well, and the school bus was there waiting for us. That was nice. So we waited for everyone to catch up, and then we drove. It's about like a 4-hour drive then to Ley, to where they went to school, which was they went to school. Okay, how am I doing for time? Good. Another one of my favourite stories. We're in Niger now, in the middle of Africa. This is another desert story. This is near Lake Chad, and these are the Wadabi people, who are another group of nomads, desert nomads this time. They're once or twice every few years, depending on, well, what we were intending was an event called a Gerald, basically, and they spring up every now and then. The big ones happen probably every few years. We were lucky enough to be working with an anthropologist who spent 30 years living with the Wadabi, and she basically found us a very beautiful Gerald, what was happening in the middle of nowhere, and managed to find out the dates of it so we could get there. The Wadabi are nomads, and when word gets out that a Gerald is happening, everyone who can descends upon this one point, because essentially a Gerald is, as festivals are in many of the cultures around the world, a place to sort of meet people, especially to make sort of romantic liaisons. If you're a nomad, it's quite hard to meet people. Farmers of you might know as well, if you live in the middle of nowhere, sometimes it's hard to meet a partner. That's the guys, when we first got there, all sort of came to greet us. In Wadabi culture, though, unlike most cultures around the world, when you're out in a pull looking for a mate, it's the men that have to dress up and beautify themselves and appeal to the ladies, who basically stand around and make a choice of who they think the fittest guy is. It's a fascinating thing, and the Wadabi are actually, the men quite proudly tell us on many occasions that they are hands down the most beautiful men on the planet. They don't care what you think, and they are. I mean, the women and men are both striking, very tall, very lithe, but like I say, the responsibility, the men are the butterflies, let's say, and they flutter around the women. The women are looking for certain characteristics in their men. Wadabi culture doesn't have any taboos around I think polygamy is probably the wrong word. At a Gerald, there's nothing wrong with having a sneaky one with someone else. You can come back to your wife or husband. It applies for men and women. The taboo doesn't exist. Consequently, Geralds are very well attended. The women, these are both wives of these guys. The women will beautify their own men, but both the men and the women will still be on the lookout. Essentially, the men are the ones that are vying for the attention of the women. So when everyone's ready, we were there for about 5 days. The whole thing lasted 5 days from start to finish. Essentially, the men line up in a long line in front of a group of women and appeal to them with various ways. The dance, the posture they choose to have. They try and accentuate all the features that Wadabi women find attractive. This is obviously a Wadabi woman. All the women are tattooed like this, and I'm sure it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think it's just an incredible body adornment, because they are incredibly good-looking people anyway. The men cover their faces, dress up, and do this incredible dance called the Yaake. And Wadabi women look for tall men. This is a tall man's a fit man, you know, a good-looking man. White teeth, white eyes, and all these are the things they're looking for in their men. And I really need a bit of footage to show you of this thing. But I saw it on Human Planet and I watched it and I thought, it's not getting across how unbelievable I thought this whole thing was. Because they're up there for hours upon hours, dancing and then doing this particular movement that I think it's supposed to mimic an egret for some reason. It's incredible. Anyway, meanwhile, opposite there is a large group of young ladies, all looking very, you know, whatever. But the good-looking ones get the girls. One of the there you go. That's a line. A line of men. There's a few ways it can happen. This is like the main event. Each day there's a huge lineup of these guys. In between these lineups, the men also dance around in a circle. They don't have to necessarily be so dressed up. The women also then stand around the edge of the circle, and when the circle is sort of slowly moving as they're dancing, and when their guy comes near them, they just touch them on the shoulder, and that then is a signal that they would like to sort of, you know, elope momentarily. They don't have to, but they know who wants to, at least. The other way is when they have a serious lineup, and everyone knows when they are, because they all come down, they kind of have a best in show, so to speak. The best in show is judged by the wives of previous winners, and these are them. And so the guys are kind of, this is the big one, because if you win best in show and you're a happy guy, you can take a lot of ladies if you would like to. The judging in itself is an incredibly strange ritual. The men all going for it in the background. Meanwhile, the judges one by one walk along the line of men, and it's like they shuffle. They walk like this. It's incredibly slowly. The whole process takes about an hour. Meanwhile, and as they're doing it, the guys are trying harder and harder and harder to appeal. And when they get to the guy they've chosen, she then moves into him, still painfully slowly. I mean, at this moment, it could be any of these guys. We still don't know. It was that guy, actually, and I didn't think it was that. I didn't think all that. But she moves in, and then she signals with her hand and just touches, and that's the guy. And if you saw the programme, unfortunately, our main character, we picked him from the start, because we were assured he was a real good looker. And he didn't get anything, he didn't win anything. Poor bloke. It was a shame, really, because they're quite a proud bunch of guys, and I bet you he dies every time. Well, he won't have seen the film, obviously, but if he ever does, he'll die a million deaths looking at himself losing. Like I was saying, that what women are looking for is a symmetry in the face, and really white eyes and white teeth, really important attributes of the men, and tallness. And yeah, I mean, really an incredible thing to watch, really quite, mind-blowing, really. I've never seen anything like it before in my life. Okay, final story. This is a Grasslands story. I mentioned it earlier, I said I'd be coming back to it. We're down in southern Ethiopia, which is where the Suri tribe live. This isn't anything to do with the story, but it's just one of those incredible things that when you see it, you've got to photograph it. All the women traditionally have always worn lip plates, for whatever reason, I don't know. There are various suggestions as to why, but I'm not really that concerned why, to be honest. I just think it looks incredible. Cattle are everything for the Suri. You're defined, your manliness, let's say, is defined by how many cattle you have. One of the things that, like I say, we tried a lot of strange foods, fruits, vegetables, everything you could possibly imagine that gets eaten around the world during that 2 years. One of the things I did when we were in Selma here was drink the cattle blood, and they don't. This doesn't. Obviously, it hurts the cow. I'm sure it does. But they drain the blood off the same point continuously over the life of the cow, and they don't kill them. But it was something, when you're standing there and someone's got a huge bowl of blood, you can't not try it. Well, I couldn't anyway, and I've got to be honest with you, I braced myself because I imagined what it would taste like, and I took a sip, ready to sort of politely smile and say thank you, and I've got to say it tasted like claret wine. I'm not being funny. It tasted nothing like blood at all. It was cool. It wasn't warm. It had none of that. It tasted, when you cut yourself and lick the blood, it didn't taste like that at all. It was smooth and tasted like a really beautiful red wine. And I'm being serious. I mean, I took another sip. I was that shocked, and I was bracing myself, ready to sort of pretend to drink it. But really, I understand what they're all going on about now, and just one of those strange encounters. We had quite a few on Human Planet. We had tarantula spiders, bats. I mean, you name it. It's the planet we live on. So the reason we were down there was to film Donga, which is the Suri tribe's version of boxing, let's say. Once a year, during one particular month, villages in this area come together at certain sites around the area and have these huge fights. It sounds quite dangerous, but well, of course it is. Fighting's dangerous, but it's although it looks quite lawless when you're there, it's really quite an effective way, or what we think, of settling a lot of sort of things between tribes and between families and between neighbourhoods, without actually it spilling out into the street, so to speak. We went a couple of times to Donga, and it's I don't know about you guys, but seeing violence that close to hand is not something that I do very often, but the only once or twice I've ever been near that kind of thing would be in a pub when someone kicks off, and the adrenaline it just goes high so quickly. This is like, this takes it to a whole new level. Two villages pitted against each other. One comes in from one. We're talking about a big arena, basically a big grass arena circle. One village comes in from one side, one from the other. Everyone's psyched up. They're firing Kalashnikovs off, and it's like it's game time, But like I say, it's actually quite a controlled event that seemingly has no rules. And I'm sure that the scores that get settled in the Donga are part of the reason why there's less violence in the streets on a daily basis, let's say, because this lot, they've always been quite a warring group of peoples down there, even historically speaking. So essentially, after there's a bit of rallying around, a bit of jeering, and then everyone comes together and forms this circle. And then it's a question of picking your opponent. This is a pretty picture. Let's go. That's the ladies watching on. So a few of the guys have got homemade armour. It's a pretty dangerous sport. I mean, the sticks are incredibly long, and a lot of people get hurt. It could be said that if you put padding on, then you're a bit of a wuss, and I'm sure that a lot of guys that goes through their minds. But better safe than sorry, I say. When you pick your opponent, obviously you've got to try and pick someone who's the same size as you, because I'd say that's quite important. The fights are very quick. once it starts, it kicks off, and it normally lasts about 5 to 10 seconds. And the winner is essentially the guy that backs down, who doesn't back down. And when a guy backs down, it stops. And this is what I liked about the Donga. It's an incredibly violent place, but when it's over, and you don't see much going on under the belt punches, if you know what I mean. But obviously, a lot of people are getting hurt. That was actually a bystander. He wasn't even fighting; he was quite near us. But that's when this, can you imagine if a stick catches you in the eye like that? If you're a winner, then you get paraded around on the shoulders of all the rest of your teammates, and it's a big day for you. That's actually, that guy in the middle there is, we had security guards in inverted commas who were working for us, because we were, kind of a group of, obviously we stood out quite easily with our cameras. Not that anyone was worried that we would get attacked, but more to the point, I think it was a bit like the mob, it's kind of like, you need our services, we need to protect you. And this guy here was our chief protector, and we didn't actually, none of us could get our voices around the Surrey language, because it's very guttural, and it's really hard to pronounce. And this guy, consequently, we called him Bob, because we couldn't say his real name. But Bob was like our best mate during filming, and he was such a character. Yeah, there he is. That's Bob there talking to the boys. These are all our guys who are like on the lookout for us. But essentially, I mean, we had to get right in there, and there's sticks are flying everywhere. That's Steve, who was our cameraman from New York, who, if you remember in the film, he was using a Phantom camera, which is this kind of, it shoots over 1,000 frames a second. So the kind of, when you see a bullet, going through a balloon full of water in slow motion, that's shot with the camera that he uses. But we wanted to see what people in a stick fight looked like when they got hit with a stick at sort of 1,000 frames a second. But there's Bob looking hard as usual. Bob actually, on one occasion, we were, Tuppence, the director, the cameraman, sound, we're standing here basically filming, and Bob's there, looking out for us, and he got hit by a stick and he went down. I should have had my wits about me a bit more, because I shot off one frame and then I started thinking, oh, we better help him, but really I should have carried on shooting, because Bob got up and grabbed this stick here, or one of these sticks, I don't know, and just momentarily went completely mad. It was spinning around like a windmill, hitting everyone. Not essentially because I think he lost quite a bit. I think he was extremely embarrassed more than anything. A couple of minutes later, he stopped, gave the stick back, and then the crowd moved back in, and that was it. And that's, for me, my lasting image of the Donga is that exact thing. There's this incredible violence, but then when it stops and it's over, and people walk away, and you've got to respect that, really. That's us, human power. I think that may be my last slide. Let me just check. Yes, it is. That's where I'm going to leave it for this evening. I hope you enjoyed it.